Recently, the 9th Asia-Pacific Conference on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights took place for the first time in Vietnam.
Are these norms?
Around 1,000 delegates representing governments, academia, and civil society shared research bodies, success stories from organizations and countries.
So a lot of sharing how to model, for example, the same with how to impact on private sector, for example. Somebody how to make much more efficient, comprehensive sexual education, for example. So this conference gave opportunity to learn, and also I think it's impacting on bigger networking among organizations, and also knowing a bigger picture what's going in the region and in the global level.
More than 20 distinguished speakers, including scholars, researchers, editors of international journals, executive directors and leaders of key organizations, universities, UN, government agencies, and youth representatives, presented papers and led discussions on the most pressing issues related to sexual and reproductive health and rights in Asia Pacific today. Hello everyone, welcome to Sharing Vietnam on VTC10 Netviet. I'm here today at the beautiful Ha Long Bay, Quảng Ninh to participate in the 9th Asia Pacific Conference on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. This is partly supported and funded by UNFPA, and we're here today with the Executive Director of UNFPA, Ms. Natalia Kanem, and she will share with us on the global strategy of UNFPA to support Asia Pacific, as Vietnam is one of the members, in enhancing the quality of sexual and reproductive health and rights. Thank you, Madam Natalia Kanem, for spending time with Sharing Vietnam today. It's a pleasure to have you on our show. I would like to know your feelings coming here to Ha Long, Quảng Ninh.
It's very exciting to be back in Vietnam. This is a beautiful country, and the natural beauty of Ha Long Bay and that beautiful profile of the rocks shows that there's also permanence in this country. I'm excited to be at the conference and to meet many old friends, but also to meet the young people who have been full participants in this 9th conference.
How do you see the efforts of Vietnam in organizing this conference?
You know, Vietnam shows leadership in many ways, and when we think about sexual and reproductive health, it affects everyone, women and girls, but also men and boys. And so I think the example of Vietnam as a country that successfully has managed a family planning program that changes policy to fit with changing times, it's very important, not only for the region, but for the rest of the world. And especially now, I think Vietnam is thinking about population data and what is happening with the young people. So this is really important for progress and development.
And could you share with us about the global strategies and priorities of UNFPA?
So looking up until 2030, we have goals as a world community, and our 3 priorities right now, we call them the 3 zeros. 0, death in childbirth. No woman should die while giving life. And a lot of the programs and the projects of Vietnam, the government, the civil society, the women's organizations, are trying to organize so that in any part of the country, no one is left behind. When you have a healthy, happy pregnancy and there's a beautiful baby, the mother should survive. She should live and be able to be there for her family. So the first 0 is 0 deaths in childbirth. The second one is 0 unmet need for family planning. And the third one, which is why I'm wearing orange, is 0 violence. You know, we have the 16 days of activism against violence. We're celebrating that in Vietnam and across the Asia Pacific, because violence against women affects 1 in every 3, and we really want that to change. No violence in the home, no violence in the community, peace in the world. That's what the United Nations stands for.
Health services. Too much of the world exists in
The 9th Asia-Pacific Conference with the theme Leave No One Behind, Justice to Sexual and Reproductive Health focused on 5 areas: overcoming social, cultural and religious barriers, strengthening justice systems towards a just economic order, making good quality sexual and reproductive health education available for all, and advancing justice and equity in healthcare, in which building a comprehensive sexual education towards all sexual orientation received the most attention.
I've found out that there's some really good work going on in Vietnam, both in terms of the policy, the national policy and legislative context to enable sexuality education to go on in schools. I've learned that you've got some fabulous young people doing some really interesting work around gathering the evidence base for sexuality education. But I've also learnt from some of this information that although you have the context, you don't necessarily have it well implemented in all schools. And that's very common to other countries as well.
When being asked by the speaker, only a few attendees in the conference hall agreed that they had experienced high-quality sex education.
And in every subject, and not only teachers.
This indicates a big gap in perception, leading to long-term implications, preventing progress in gender equality, family planning, gender-based violence, and sexually transmitted disease.
I think one of the things that's missing in many countries is that it's not included in initial or pre-service training. So we are always playing catch-up. Teachers are going into schools without training, they're being asked to teach this area of the curriculum, and then they're having to be trained afterwards. So that's very difficult for them. It's about professionalising this area of the curriculum and recognising that it is as important as other areas of the curriculum, like maths, like science. Some of the typical barriers are a lack of leadership from the school administration team, who are fearful of a backlash from the community and from parents. There are cultural issues in many instances about why it's difficult to teach sexuality education in schools. A lack of training, as I say, is really critical as well for teachers, and also teachers and students feeling safe to engage in those discussions in the classroom.
Vietnam was one of the first signatories to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The conference is a good opportunity for nations in the region to redefine, monitor, and implement better the commitment to these visions. The conference brings together a huge body of quality evidence. However, there is a long way from evidence to being put into laws and policy development process. So what should we do to bridge the gap between data generations and law development?
And it's one thing to have a law on paper. It's one thing to have a hope and an aspiration. It takes work. It takes dialogue. It takes people partnering together to make that a reality. And I'm proud that UNFPA in Vietnam has been helping to find solutions, working with our partners. The government this afternoon had a wonderful presentation on treating boys and girls fairly and ending the sex selection bias where you have more boy babies born than more girl babies. There should be equality and justice from the beginning of life through childhood, adolescence, straight through till old age. Part of the solution is also making sure that old people can be protected, and we're looking at ways of having good, aging, healthy adults. I feel it's really important to say that the investments that Vietnam is making should also focus on investing in the adolescent girl. The evidence shows that her schooling is very protective. It's going to allow her to be able to find a job, to be able to raise her family, to stay healthy. If the girl gets pregnant too early and there's still adolescent pregnancy and child marriage in the country, that stops her development. I want every Vietnamese girl to know that her future is important for the country, and this country is important for the world, so that we all work together.
The economic situation of Asia Pacific in the past 10 years has shown rapid growth. However, many population groups have been left behind. Many efforts and interventions are made, but progress is still low. What should the government and donors do and join hands to tackle this issue?
Many of those who are left behind, it's because of the sexual and reproductive health situation of women and girls. Women and girls have to be empowered to know about sex and sexuality, to plan their family, to stay safe through childbirth, to avoid being coerced into behavior or into STIs, which is sexually transmitted infection. So we feel that the economic situation, with half of the population being female, starts with empowerment of women, gender equality, equal treatment, and education of the young girl. So we thought at this conference about a lot of the issues, the barriers. Sometimes it's culture. Sometimes people say it's religion. Sometimes people say parents are not allowing their children to learn about sex and sexuality. The only way to overcome that is through dialogue, through explaining why we're doing what we're doing and the protective effect, and listening to the other side also. So I think that's why this conference was really good. I'd like to show the example of this report on the situation of youth in Vietnam, which was cooperated on by UNFPA and many of our partners. And the young people who were at this conference said, we need information in order to protect ourselves. We need to be treated with respect when we go to the clinic. We also want to contribute to the development of our country. So a conference like this helps young people to take their leadership role. And we saw that here.
And for this question, I believe that many countries in Asia Pacific, including Vietnam, face that is the donor funding for sexual reproductive health for this region has been sharply reduced since a lot of countries in the region has moved to a middle income status. So what should the government consider to remove this shortage of funding?
The focus in a middle income country has to be on making important choices. And speaking for UNFPA, we believe that these choices should center on safe childbirth, allowing women to plan their family as they wish, and to ending violence and things that make women live in fear. So if you're in a middle income country, it's been shown by a lot of evidence. If you invest $1 in reproductive health services, you can get 6 times or even 120 times if you do the whole spectrum back. So it's a very cost-effective investment. And I think here, as the government is planning, as civil society is planning, really as families are planning, it's very important in a middle-income country to choose wisely. And so that's why a dialogue like we're having here is very important.
Thank you, Madam, so much for spending time with Sharing Vietnam, and I hope that you have a great overview from Vietnam in particular and the Asia Pacific region from this trip to Halong Bay.
Thank you too. It's been a pleasure.
And that's the end of our program today. Thank you so much for watching us. And this is just one episode in a sequence of programs evolving around the topic of quality services for sexual and reproductive health. And we hope to see you again for the next programs. For any questions and feedback, please email to sharingvietnam@netviet.tv.net. Thank you and see you again.